Hello and welcome to News Desk. Today there's only one topic the world's talking about, and that, of course, is the US election, with Donald Trump now declared the winner. I'm Alex Forrest-Whiting.
And I'm Nehal Johari. There is plenty for us to talk about today, and we would love for you to send us your comments and questions throughout the stream.
So what was predicted to be a very tightly fought race wasn't. The former US president and convicted felon will be heading back to the White House. Here he is declaring victory even before all states had finished their counts.
We made history for a reason tonight, and the reason is going to be just that. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy?
So Donald Trump there declaring victory from Florida. And at the moment, Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris has yet to concede. Let's just introduce you to who we have around the table, because we've got a whole host of people joining us for this very special and slightly longer news desk. First of all, we have got Brent Goff, somebody that many of you will recognise. He is chief news anchor here at DW News. He hosts The Day, which is a daily current affair programme on DW News. It focuses on the US and also Europe. And actually, Brent, you've been up pretty much all night because you yourself have been hosting the DW election coverage.
Right.
How are you feeling? Awake?
Well, I think I've got a little bit of adrenaline left in me, but it's starting to go down, I can tell.
Stay with us. We need to feed you with coffee to keep you awake, don't we?
Yeah,
Thank you for being with us.
Well, next to Brent, we have Michaela Cavanaugh. She's been on News Desk before, so you might know her from our previous episodes. Michaela will be providing us with some of the very essential context as to where things stand now, and she has access to all of the important election charts and maps that we will need throughout the discussion.
Yeah, that's right.
And over to my left, we have Beenish Javid. She is a very experienced reporter for DW News, covering, in particular, South Asia, so India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, that whole area. You'll be able to give us a bit of a feeling of what's going on there, since we know.
That part of the world is
that
watching
part
us,
of the world, yeah. So thank you also for being with us.
In the chat, you will see Cherry Chan, who many of you know from previous episodes as well. Unfortunately, we couldn't fit her around the table, but she is very much a part of the team and of this show.
And we have to make it very clear that that's not because she's large.
No.
She's definitely not. It's more just we can't fit more chairs around the table. Also, we've got some great guests who will be joining us down the line. We have DW special correspondent Aya Ibrahim. She will be joining us from the US and has been following the campaign there very, very closely. So she, as you can see there, is actually with us from Washington, D.C., right at the heart there of politics. Later in the stream, we will also hopefully be able to go to our DW Chief International Editor, Richard Walker. He is in Florida. And also we will be joined by a News Desk regular that many of you will know, Melissa Chan. She, of course, is an anchor and also has a great expertise, not only in the US, but also covering China. So she will be with us a little bit later. Before that, though, Nehal, you've got some comments that you've already picked up in the chat.
We do, and we do really want your questions and comments to come in throughout the stream so that we can pose them to our guests. We've had some comments coming in under the community post. For instance, several people are congratulating Donald Trump. Someone else wrote, "Dear God, this has me nervous." A third user wrote that this notion of people getting sick of typical politicians and electing someone who is not a politician reverberates with young Americans. A bit strange considering that Donald Trump was the president, so surely he is a politician as well.
Yeah.
But and a fourth person's asking us, this is an American voter who says, "Isn't the EU a powerhouse on its own? I don't get why our elections matter to them." So that's something we will definitely address later. We will talk about why countries in the EU as well as around the world care about the US election. So please do send us your burning questions, feelings and thoughts, and I will bring them up throughout our chat.
And also we've got a poll.
Oh, right, we do.
We've got it all here on News Desk.
So the poll question for today is, will a Donald Trump presidency be good for your country? You can respond with a yes, no, or too early to say? I'll just repeat the question. Will a Donald Trump presidency be good for your country? Yes, no, or too early to say? You should be able to view the poll on the live chat. Please vote, and we'll get back to the results later.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what those results are. Thanks very much, Nihal. Right, so Donald Trump has won the US election, including some of those key swing states that we've been talking about over the past few weeks in particular. Michaela, now, you can hopefully bring us up to speed with with what it's looking like at the moment.
What it's looking like, yeah, absolutely, Alex. So, okay. I mean, this time yesterday, we were all preparing for a long, drawn-out week of uncertainty, of vote counting, of sort of nail-biting. And, you know, we walk in this morning and things are looking very different. Okay, so bear with me while I have two screens here. So in just a moment, we'll pull up we use AP as our sort of benchmark for
Associated Press.
Associated Press, that's right, the AP. So I would say, so it was about, you know, we expected, as we said, we expected this long, drawn-out week. Instead, we saw Trump come to a very quick and decisive victory. That started with, that sort of relied on swing states. So we've heard a lot about swing states. I think many of us are familiar with them by now, but let's just be clear about what those are. Those are battleground states where it could go either way, Republican or Democrat. And so these swing states are North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Michigan, and Nevada. And so in the hours after the polls closed, we saw almost, like quite quickly, we saw Trump win a victory in North Carolina just about 4 hours or so after the first polls closed. That's here. That was, so that was 51.1%. And then not long after that, and also just a quick primer on the Electoral College. Electoral College, we have 538 seats and the president any president needs to win 270 of them. So that's where these swing states come into play. These are the ones that really tell us where the support could go. So again, in the hours after, we saw North Carolina, which has 16 Electoral College votes. It's quite a few. And that went to Trump. And then quickly after that, we saw Georgia down here.
Just to interrupt you, Brent, were you on air while any of this was happening, like with North Carolina?
Yeah, North Carolina was the first state that the first swing state that AP called. And that was about 11 p.m. our East Coast time. It was about 5 in the morning here. Yeah. And the thinking had been that if Kamala Harris were able to win Georgia and North Carolina, both of them being swing states, the chances of her then winning were very good, because then usually if you can win those two, you can win Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is the swing state that has to be won. Yeah. And then the signs started, as you were saying, fairly early in the evening that the swing states were tending to be Trump.
Yeah.
And that's what started to happen. In North Carolina was the first to fall, and then after that it was like dominoes.
Yeah. Michaela, sorry,
Right.
just
Thank
interesting
you.
because Brent, of course, was on air when this was happening.
I was having it all happen live. That's right, and I was asleep, I'm happy to say.
And we were too, I have to add this, we were very careful we waited for AP to call it, because you have to be careful with the votes, because this is counting that's happening in real time. And we know what happened in the last election, we know what happened in 2016, and we also know that we relied on the polls in 2016 and in 2020. Both times they overweighted the opponent to Trump. This time we thought that they had made progress in weighting the possibilities correctly, and again...
Yeah. There was a lot in the margin of error with these polls, wasn't there? Because it was very, very tight.
Yeah.
But then in the end, it wasn't tight.
It wasn't. Yeah, exactly.
Michaela, do carry on.
So, exactly. So then we had North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania earlier this morning. That's 19 Electoral College votes. That took a bit longer to come in, but once it did, it was very clear by that point, I think, that it was looking like a Trump victory. And then what really tipped us over the edge was Wisconsin. Wisconsin is 10 Electoral College votes, which Trump had flipped in 2016, but not in 2020. And Wisconsin is up here.
So if we can just go back to the map.
Do we have the map
great.
here? Yeah. Oh, Yeah, so that's with 49.7% of the vote in Wisconsin. And that came in, around, midday, I guess, or just a few hours ago.
So it is still, as you can see from those numbers, pretty close, isn't it? 49.7 to Trump, and what was that, 48.8?
48.8% for
Harris.
Harris,
Yeah.
exactly. And I mean, we all, in the week leading up, all of those exit polls, or all of those pre-election polls said it's going to be razor tight, it's going to be neck and neck. And, well, it didn't quite work out that way, did it?
Because how it works with the Electoral College is that you, in most states, apart from 2, you've just got to win. You've just got to get over the line, and you've got all those votes, haven't you?
That's right.
And that was all they were.
Yeah.
Winner takes all, yeah. Great, thank you very much. Did you have
Absolutely.
anything else to add? I mean, there's lots to add, isn't there? Maybe
There's
we'll be
lots to add.
talking about...
Let's come back later. We'll talk about the popular vote. We'll talk about Congress. Exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Michaela. OK, let's bring in Aya Ibrahim, who is our special correspondent. She's in Washington, D.C. for us. And Aya, I'd just love to get your reaction to what's happened and what the mood is like over there.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be with you guys. I think it's a debut for me on News Desk, so it's a pleasure to find you at the proverbial big table, even if you're from...
Yeah, the big table, yeah. I should have said that before, actually. The big table is a Brent Goff term. He invites everyone to the big table.
Because there's always room at the big table.
Because there's always room, although we found actually there wasn't so much room today. Yeah, so I'm sorry you're not with us at the big table, but it is great that we do have you in Washington, D.C.
There's no place I'd rather be, I must say. I mean, I'm right now where we normally do our live hits for the TV broadcast for our followers. Follow that as well. And as you see behind me, it's quite quiet now, but it wasn't like that up until a few hours ago. Our entire team was here through the night following this this election that we have, we've been reporting the buildup to that election for weeks. And I think, what really stands out to me is something that Michaela said. We were expecting a much longer day today and a much, much, much more tense few days. All of the polls were suggesting that any win would be neck and neck, that it would come down to razor thin margins in these swing states like Michigan, for example, which I'd been following closely because of the Arab American vote. I also report for DW's Arabic service. And that's just not what happened. It really is that Donald Trump was able to be the more convincing candidate for the majority of Americans. And we can go into the reasons why, Kamala Harris did start her campaign much later. Maybe she didn't succeed in distancing herself enough from her boss, Joe Biden, which was an always very tricky balance for her to try and walk. But that's certainly, Trump winning isn't a shock. This isn't 2016, but the extent with which he has won, I think, is something that all of us were pretty much in awe of this morning. And we're just, we're trying to brainstorm how we're going to cover the next few days, the next phase. And so, we'd definitely love to hear from our followers as well, what questions they have for the next phase of this election. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of time between now and inauguration when Donald Trump, officially returns to the White House, and that's always a really interesting time, right, with Joe Biden being a lame duck president, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so that's the big night, I think.
Just let me interrupt you there. Brent, Aya just said there this was not a surprise, this was not 2016. But what was your reaction when you started to realise that this was definitely going Trump's way after, as we talked earlier about these polls being too close to call?
I'll tell you, my gut told me one thing, and my mind told me another. My mind told me that Kamala Harris had a good chance of winning. My gut told me that Donald Trump was going to win. And I think there are two reasons why I've got to learn to listen to my gut. And one was that the polling was not accurate. And we've learned now the hard way in several elections that is the case. And the best example of that is earlier this week, a poll came out from the state of Iowa, which has been a Democrat state before, but has recently been a Republican state. And the poll showed Kamala Harris ahead by several percentage points, this was almost incredible. It's hard to believe. And that had us going into last night thinking, okay, Kamala Harris is probably going to win this. Now we know, we've seen the numbers from Iowa, that Donald Trump had a clear victory there. So the lesson there is the polls will deceive you if you let them. So you can't rely on the polls. That is something that the polling companies, YouGov, I mean, all of them, they have to come to terms with their poor performance. Now 3 U.S. presidential elections in a row. That's one thing, and I think we have to come to terms with that too.
Can I?
Yeah.
Is it just that the performance of the companies is bad, or is it that people are not telling the truth in the polls?
I don't think people are being untruthful. I think that the methodology of taking polls, particularly in the U.S., is now flawed. And it's hard to accept that because there was a time when the possibility of taking polls was, one, easy, and the methodology was also easy and sound. Getting a representative sample in the United States was good when you had an infrastructure of landline telephones and people who answered, which allowed you to know the demographics of the people you were talking to. You could have a representative sample easily. Now, most people have cut the cord. They don't have a landline. They have just their smartphone, their cell phone. And guess what? They don't answer the phone when someone calls and they don't recognize the number. I mean, think about that. I mean, our behavior is so different when it comes to communicating than it was even 10, 15 years ago. And that has made polling very flawed. So there's that. The other point I think that's important for us to take on board is the Democratic Party. And this is not aimed directly at Kamala Harris. This is the apparatus, has shown that it is grossly, grossly disconnected from the reality of the majority of Americans. And when you look at the demographics of the vote as well, this is not an identity politics story that we have been told many times. This is something that spans all groups of Americans. And for some reason, they felt compelled to vote for Donald Trump. And the Democratic Party did not see that. And I think a lot of us in the media also, willfully, unwillfully, also did not see that.
So let's just pick that point up with Aya then. Is that something that you were seeing on the ground?
I think, being here and having been to spoken to Trump supporters, he has managed to attract a very diverse and very broad spectrum of voters. I mean, if you had told me, Trump's first term was known for the so-called Muslim ban, his policies towards Palestine, Israel have certainly, if you look at them on the surface, whether it's moving the Israeli embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights to be under Israeli sovereignty, and a whole host of other policies towards the Middle East, you wouldn't think that he would attract Arab American voters, but he has. I've spoken to Arab American voters who say, we have been ignored by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, Harris is campaigning with Liz Cheney and Republicans and not giving us a platform at the Democratic National Convention. Why should we, in the midst of the unbelievable civilian suffering, many people, many Arab Americans trace their roots, half families in Gaza, half families in Lebanon, and they say, the amount of death that has happened under this administration's watch is just untenable for us to then see that and then go ahead and vote for Kamala Harris. And even though, Donald Trump hasn't had the most, on the surface of it, the most favorable policies towards the Middle East from an Arab American perspective, what they say is at least our people weren't dying. And the Democratic Party hasn't made any effort to reach out to them from their perspective.
From their
perspective. And
perspective.
that has really fractured the Arab, from their perspective, correct. And that has really fractured the Arab American vote, which has historically been reliably Democratic. And obviously the Arab American vote, that's a very small population, but I do use that as an example of exactly what Brent was mentioning there, which is perhaps really a failure on the Democratic Party's side to find the correct messaging to key groups, right? To really make them feel like they are the ones, that they are the ones for them. If we just look at what happened in Michigan just in the week, about 10 days before the election, the Democratic campaign sent former President Bill Clinton, and he stood and he, I'm now paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact quote, that, Palestinians are dying in Gaza because of, Hamas is using them as a human shield. And then Donald Trump made a visit to Dearborn, Michigan, and said, I will bring you peace. Now, we don't know if he's going to be able to do that. We don't know if he has a plan. But from an Arab American perspective, that is not the messaging that they needed to hear, regardless of where you stand on the conflict, right? Yeah. I'm just talking about it now from a perspective of Arab American voters that I've been speaking to. And I think there's going to be a kind of come to Jesus moment in the Democratic Party right now about their messaging and how is it that they can readdress, groups that have been reliably on their sides historically, but seem to have felt completely left out during this particular campaign.
Because, Beanish, I was going to say, it's not just obviously Arab Americans, it's Muslim Americans, despite Donald Trump's...
Yeah, and I think what's also very interesting is that Trump realized this weakness of the Democratic Party. And despite all of, as I have said, that, his Muslim travel ban and his Islamophobia was, I think, worse during his era. But despite all of that, he was able to use that vulnerability, and he got some endorsements from some Muslim leaders, and then. And many of the, as Aya also said, that many of the Muslim voters were saying that, yes, we understand that Trump could be bad, because that was the argument that many Democrats were saying, that if Trump comes to power, he could even be worse for the Palestinians, for Middle East. But they were just not buying this argument because...
Well, he could be better. And he's known for being a transactional person, right? You're not his friend unless you've got something to give him. And I think, especially for Arab Americans, they've been subjected to the dogma of the Democrats, which in their mind has brought them nothing. They still see what's happening to the Palestinians. There's no change. And Trump, even if he doesn't say it, the way he maneuvers implies that I will go to Jerusalem, to Israel, and I know how to make a deal, and I will bring this to an end. Because I'm not operating under the parameters of some ideology or dogma. I'm going to go and say, let's make a deal.
Yeah.
And
that
has appeal.
Yeah. And there is nothing really significantly that Democrats can show to the Arab Americans, to Muslim voters, that any one single step that was convincing, that was strong enough to convince people that Democrats were actually serious in resolving the conflict.
Yeah.
And we're just seeing at the moment pictures on the screen of Donald Trump. That was him making his victory speech in Florida earlier this morning. Actually, as we said before all those key states had actually declared, but it was pretty clear that he was the winner. Of course, it's not just Arab Americans, Muslim Americans that he won over, is it?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up another voter base that has responded a bit differently this year. These are Hispanic voters. They've drifted towards Trump this year. Just a few of the examples are some southern parts of Texas and many parts of Pennsylvania. What happened there? Brent, would you like to?
What I think is interesting is if you look at the polls and ask Latinos, Hispanics, there are many words in America's identity politics soup for describing them. But if you ask them how they identify themselves, the trend is that on the census form, which is taken every 10 years, more and more are saying that they identify as white. And Donald Trump tapped into that. So you could argue that he is exclusionary in his politics, in his let's make America great again. But actually what he has tapped into is a change in demographic self-perception that is inclusive, because the Latinos, as the longer they are in the United States, begin to identify themselves as white Americans. And I know this from my own experience growing up in North Carolina. I have seen that happen. Yeah. And for some reason, he knew to tap into that. And I think that was part of the reason why you saw this shift. And it wasn't just men, it was also women who shifted over to him.
I was reading, I think white women have voted, majority of the white women have voted for Trump.
That's right.
And that is a bit surprising.
Yeah.
Aya, you're listening. Yeah. Sorry, Aya, I just wanted to make sure that you could come in on this discussion because you're obviously there on the ground.
Yeah. The Latino vote, obviously that's also not a monolithic group here in the United States. I mean, that encompasses people that are coming from across Latin America. A colleague of mine, Benjamin Alvarez Gruber, has reported on this extensively. And my impression is that just because, somebody has an immigrant background doesn't mean that they are willing to forgive the immigration policies of the Biden-Harris administration. So a big issue there is the southern border. So you'll hear Latinos say, I'm not against migration, but I do not want to see illegal migration. And they see that as a threat to the country that they have made their home. That is something that you hear across the board, right? People are saying we're not against immigration, but the way that the Biden-Harris administration has handled the influx of migrants for whatever we could talk for hours about the migration policies under Biden and Harris, but that is not automatically something that is accepted by people just because they happen to be immigrants.
Yeah.
Right?
And let me just pause you. Let me just pause you there a second, because actually we have got a short clip from Donald Trump from this morning where he is specifically talking about the issue of migration and in particular the border. So let's just have a little listen to that.
It's the greatest country and potentially the greatest country in the world by far. And right now we're going to just work very hard to get all of that back. We're going to make it the best it's ever been. We can do that. If we had to wait longer, I don't know. It was going bad, and it was going bad fast. We're going to have to seal up those borders, and we're going to have to let people come into our country. We want people to come back in, but we have to let them come back in, but they have to come in legally. They have to come in legally.
So there we have it. Donald Trump, they're saying we're going to have to seal up those borders, Aya. And he got a huge round of applause, didn't he?
He also said they can come, but they can come legally.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he is. I mean, Aya is exactly right. He is tapping into what immigrants will tell you in the United States, as they will here. I came here legally, and it's not easy. I want everyone to have to go through that process of coming here legally. And it is interesting. If it's close to you, if you're first generation American, it's a very experienced, real, lived thing to know what it's like to cross the border and to come to the United States. And he taps into that.
Yeah. Brent, there are some specific comments coming in for you. Our user Carolina Villena, who is a regular viewer, wanted to thank you. She said she's very happy about your presence.
Oh, thank you.
Your presence. We are in awe.
There are quite a few specific comments coming in for you. And Bartholomew said that that's the thing. Brent, he's agreeing with your comment earlier, and he says, my mother, who is Nicaraguan, considers herself as white. I remember this growing up, and I'm 54 years old. Yeah. I don't, but she does, and this is a phenomenon.
It's a phenomenon, right? It's interesting.
And Aya, is that something that you've seen on the ground as well?
It might have been anecdotally here and there, but I would say that the overwhelming sentiment is that of immigrants, who are citizens or are here on a recognized status, whatever that may be, is that, they say, of course, their roots hail from a certain part of the world, but their loyalty is really to the United States, and they want to see that function and work for people that are here. That's something that I heard way more often, I think, than particular identification with white or not. And I think, Donald Trump, when he says that, when he says, I thought his speech at, his victory speech was actually quite balanced, right? Mm-hmm. He didn't attack Kamala Harris. Mm-hmm. He didn't go too much into the vitriol. He said I'm paraphrasing, he said he will be a president for all Americans. But also that particular comment about immigration is something that will appeal to a lot of Democrats in that phrasing, right? We want people to come, but we want them to come legally. And so it certainly sets a much, less sharp tone than definitely what we've heard from him on the campaign trail, certainly in the past 2 weeks. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a peaceful presidency. A peaceful and calm presidency. I think we really have to wait and see the decisions that come in. I mean, he also said, it would appear that Elon Musk is going to be on the presidential team in some capacity. It's unclear what exactly, but certainly as far as that first speech, it will appeal to a lot of people who are maybe on the fence, voted Democrat, might be disappointed, but will now end up saying, okay, well, maybe it just won't be that bad. Like, let's give it a shot. He's slated to also win the popular vote. So, I think it was quite balanced, and certainly that comment about immigration will appeal to a large, broad audience.
I mean, she's right. His bark is usually worse than his bite. I think we've learned that from him.
Well, we'll see.
But he really does know how to bark.
Yeah. Let's just move on a little bit now about reaction to Donald Trump's win. First of all, Aya, what has been the reaction in the US so far to this win? I mean, let's not forget that Donald Trump is a convicted felon, also a former president, but a convicted felon, and he is going to be the president again, currently president-elect. So what has been the reaction there?
I think the whole, his legal issues have not hurt him with his base. As a matter of fact, I mean, he was able to weave that very well into his narrative of being anti-establishment, of the entire, legal and political system being against him. And he would often use that as to say, like, look, this is how much the system sees me as a threat because I'm standing up for you. So that kind of thing has never really hurt him with his base, and it doesn't seem to have really, obviously played a role in the result. I mean, again, we cannot emphasize this enough, slated to win the popular vote, and quite an overwhelming victory also in the electoral college. So it's strange to say, but it almost feels like that's quite far into the background. It remains to be seen if he really does, go into revenge mode when it comes to things like the Department of Justice and his political opponents. It's really something that we're going to have to wait and very, very closely. In terms of the vice president, Kamala Harris was set to give some kind of speech at Howard University, not far away from where we're sitting here in Washington, D.C., her alma mater, a historically Black university. But she ended up not giving a speech last night. We're told that she's going to address the crowds today. I was at Howard as they were setting up that stage that Kamala Harris was supposed to take, and I spoke to students, and their enthusiasm for a possible Harris presidency was huge. The fact that she was coming back to their university, they talked to me about what she represents. She would have been the first woman, also the first woman of color to be president. And of course, there was a lot of heartbreak at Howard last night. I mean, you could see it as soon as Georgia was called or projected even for Donald Trump. I mean, the mood went from joy on campus to just immediate disappointment and feelings of defeat. And there is something about seeing that many, their aspirations sort of disappear in a minute. And so there's going to be a lot of tears on the streets because of that defeat as well.
We can't ignore, though, the fact that there have been a huge outpouring of messages, congratulatory messages to Donald Trump from across the world, from every part of the world, it does seem like. And, sorry, I just wanted to bring up that we've got just some of those examples. I think Michaela can bring them up on screen of just who has reached out and congratulated Trump. Again, even before his actual victory was shored up, they were messaging. So are we able just to see some of those messages that people have been putting out. OK, we've got President Zelensky there, Ukraine's president. We'll be talking about Ukraine in a moment. There we've got the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer congratulating him. And there we have Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, which is a good place to stop because we have Beanish with us. And I want to talk about South Asia in particular. I want to talk about India because, first of all, we can see there that that's part of what he said. But what exactly did Prime Minister Modi say to Trump in his congratulatory message?
Yeah, so he tweeted and he basically said, heartiest congratulations, my friend Donald Trump.
My friend.
Yeah, and Donald Trump also addresses him as his friend. So both are quite, appears that they are quite close. So heartiest congratulations, my friend Donald Trump. Maybe we could also see the tweet.
Yeah, we have the tweet here and we have some photos that come with it,
Okay,
right?
perfect. Heartiest congratulations, my friend Donald Trump, on your historic election victory. As you build on the success of your previous term, I look forward to renewing our collaboration to further strengthen the India-US Comprehensive Global and Strategic Partnership. Together, let's work for the betterment of our people and to promote global peace, stability, and prosperity. And he also shared pictures with his tweet, and which, of course, shows the relationship both leaders enjoyed and still enjoy. And I think there's something between the two. There is definitely a strong chemistry between these two leaders, and I certainly see that. When two leaders enjoy a good relationship, of course, it is overall good for the two countries.
And why do they enjoy a good relationship? Is it because they're both these so-called strong men, these strong leaders who don't back down?
Yeah, I think we cannot deny that, definitely. But as Brent has mentioned, and we all know that Trump also looks at everything through the prism of trade, business, transaction, also national security. And India is the strongest ally of the US in Indo-Pacific. It is the most populous nation in the world, 5th largest economy. Right. India actually really honestly doesn't care who is going to be the president of the United States.
That's
because
true.
It has a huge importance as a counterweight to China in the region.
I was going to say, that message, that tweet that Modi sent out, it was meant for Trump and the Americans, but it was also meant for a man by the name of Xi Jinping, right?
Yeah.
If I were Xi Jinping, I could imagine seeing that he's got to be scratching his head and thinking, okay, what kind of deal can I make with this man yet again? Right?
Yes.
But you're right.
So I certainly think that for India, a Trump presidency, I mean, as I've mentioned, like overall in South Asia, especially for India, India enjoys such a comfortable position that really doesn't matter. But for sure, there are some things that each leader brings on the table, their personality, their priorities. And I certainly think that there's some good news for India, especially when it comes to like domestic issues of India, like human rights violations, attacks on like Muslims, like minorities, and when Democrats are in power.
Because Trump doesn't care. When you say, what do you mean by that?
So because Democrats, even though they consider India to be a very important country and they want to deal, they are the strongest ally, but they would still poke a bit of what's happening in India, criticize a bit on erosion of democracy, on human rights violations, on protection of minorities. But India somehow has very low tolerance when there's foreign interference, and especially of what's happening inside the country. So this is good news for Narendra Modi, that at least because we don't expect this from Trump, and also from Republicans traditionally. So we'll not expect that, he's going to bother India in that scenario. And I also think that India has a policy of non-alignment. So it works closely with the Western world. It also closely works with Russia and has a very strong policy of looking towards East. So tapping into Global South, very important part.
And Trump facilitates
part of the BRICS, and Trump facilitates that.
And the BRICS being also Iran then as well.
Yes. Yeah. So I think overall for India, it is a good news. But could be small areas of friction between the two, because Trump has publicly criticized the high tariffs that India has on US.
He also wants to impose more,
Yes.
doesn't he?
Himself,
Yeah.
So that's India. I know there's a lot more to talk about, and I know you would like to talk about more, but just to keep it going then, what about Bangladesh, which is...
So a very important emerging player, I would say, in the South Asia country that was largely ignored, but it's a country that I think, because of its strategic location, has become very important. And Bangladesh is one country, and it's also, let me first bring in this tweet by Trump. Michaela, if you can show that tweet, just a few days ago, before US elections on 31st October, Trump tweeted and criticized Bangladesh. All of a sudden, this country, Bangladesh, he criticized, and he said that there is like a strong crackdown on Hindus and on minorities in Bangladesh. And basically what he was trying to do was he was trying to tap into Hindu American voters. And he also congratulated Modi in that tweet. But all of a sudden, one country is like, why is Trump criticizing us? What have we done? And he just mentioned this like flowery, like extra exaggeration of like there's chaos there. And of course, yes, there have been attacks on Hindus in Bangladesh, but the way he projected it, it was definitely a political message. And Muhammad Yunus, the leader of the interim government in Bangladesh, Nobel laureate, he enjoys a lot of support from Democrats. He's liberal, very open-minded person, and India was not very happy when he came to power, because India had a very close, strong relationship with former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. And there's also a small friction that happened with Biden administration, because they quickly also endorsed Muhammad Yunus when he came to power. Mm-hmm. But this just shows what this is something like the Trump tweet is something I think maybe making Muhammad Yunus or the interim government in Bangladesh a bit anxious,
yes,
I would say. But honestly, I think they will work it out.
Yeah. And just very briefly, what about Pakistan?
Pakistan has become the US now sees Pakistan mostly through the prism of security. It has lost that significant strategic importance because US withdraw from because of the US troops withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. I think Trump would continue to look at Pakistan through the prism of security. But I would just quickly say that there is a lot of enthusiasm in Pakistan, especially in voters of Imran Khan, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, who is in jail. They think and they assume that because he also had a good relationship with Imran Khan, both populist leaders, that he may put pressure on Pakistani military or he may put pressure on Pakistani judiciary to release him. I personally don't think that will happen because there's an ecosystem, and US has a very clear policy that's coming from the National Security, Council, that they look at Pakistan through prism of security. So I'm not sure that Trump will be very keen on pushing for democracy and eradicating political suppression.
But it is fascinating just to take that. I mean, I know South Asia is an enormous region, but just to take those three countries, looking at those through the prism of a Trump
more than
win.
1 billion people. Alone India is more than 1 billion. Bangladesh also.
The most populous state in the world. Yeah. Just because we've still got Aya, and I know that at some point Aya will have to disappear because she has other jobs to do as well, like reporting for the TV news. We did just mention before about the Middle East. We were talking specifically about those Arab American voters not necessarily coming out for Kamala Harris and the Democrats because they're very unhappy about what's been going on in Gaza and also now Lebanon. Netanyahu, so the Israeli Prime Minister, has never made a secret of his love, I think we can call it a love, for Donald Trump. And he was one of the first people to send a congratulatory message to Trump this morning. Let's just bring that tweet up, Michaela, if that's possible. But Aya, I just wanted to bring you in about this. You've reported extensively yourself from Israel. Do you think that now that, or that when Trump is officially back in the White House, that we will see change in the Middle East? We will see a change with what's going on with Gaza and Lebanon? Sorry, we're just looking at the tweet there from Netanyahu.
So very friendly. Dear
Very
Donald
friendly.
and Melania Trump, congratulations on history's greatest comeback. Your historic return to the White House offers a new beginning for America and a powerful recommitment to the great alliance between Israel and America. This is a huge victory in true friendship, Benjamin and Sarah Netanyahu.
So there we go, true friendship.
Donald Trump,
proper
yes,
love.
yes.
So, Aya, I just would love to get your thoughts on whether you think that will make any difference to what's going on there.
So Donald Trump, throughout the campaign trail, this is the case for Ukraine, but also for the war in the Middle East, the war in Gaza currently, has said that if he was in office, these wars would have never broken out, and that, I think at some point he said that they will stop even before he takes office. That could be Trumpian hyperbole, but there are reports that Trump, wants these wars to end. He wants to see stability in the Middle East because he, in his first term, he was the architect, or at least his administration was responsible for the Abraham Accords. So this wave of normalization between Gulf states, most notably the United Arab Emirates and Israel, which would have been actually unthinkable before. I mean, these are countries that didn't have official diplomatic and economic ties with Israel, but under a Trump administration, this happened. And the big next Gulf country that Israel certainly wants to have relations with is Saudi Arabia. And that would really seal sort of that particular direction of Arab-Israeli relations in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia being, not only a leading geopolitical power in the Middle East, but also, a leader in the Muslim world. And the Saudis have been very clear that nothing of that sort would happen before the war ends, and that nothing of that sort would happen, this is a more recent development, without a two-state solution, a state for the Palestinians. Now, it's unclear whether that will happen, particularly under the current Israeli government, which has, Benjamin Netanyahu has spoken time and time again against a two-state solution with a sovereign, independent Palestinian state. But that will be something that Donald Trump will want to at least try and resurrect. And an absolute first step there would be ending the fighting in Gaza and giving Arab leaders some kind of concession, some kind of accomplishment that he was able to somehow stop this war, which has been going on for more than a year now. And even according to many Israeli analysts, Israel has done what it can in terms of fighting Hamas in Gaza, and that really, the threat is now the focus of the fighting is certainly now more on Lebanon. And so that's something that I think will be a part of his, at least goals or on the agenda. We saw Jared Kushner on the stage with his son-in-law, who was, the architect of the Abraham Accords and really spearheaded that effort in the Trump administration. Jared Kushner had been kind of absent from the campaign, and so seeing him on the stage today with his wife, Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka Trump. Of course, it's not unusual to have family members on the stage, but it does seem that there might be another attempt at Abraham Accords 2.0, with another attempt to resurrect a possible normalization deal with Saudi Arabia, which had actually been kind of underway already until the October 7th terror attacks occurred, and of course the ensuing war in Gaza, which has resulted in so much human suffering.
But you talk there about Lebanon and obviously Israel at war with Hezbollah, the militant group there backed by Iran. Iran, of course, being the elephant in the room in all this. I'd love to know, well, first of all, Ayo, if you've got thoughts on that, but also Beanish, because this is something that you've looked into as well. I mean, we know what Trump did the last time round. He decided that this nuclear deal that various countries led by the US, were moving towards with Iran. He pulled out of that. Will there be more aggression, do you think, towards Iran?
I think we're likely to see a return to the maximum pressure policy of Trump, which officials in Israel would certainly welcome. Under the Biden administration, there was a hostage deal, not a hostage deal for the Israeli hostages held in Gaza, but right before that, I was here in Washington actually, and there was a hostage deal. A deal to release Iranian Americans that were held in Iran in exchange for the release of some Iranian funds that were, I believe, held in South Korea. And after that, October 7th broke out, and Republicans and definitely supporters of Trump who are critical of the Biden administration will always say, well, look, under the Biden administration, restrictions were loosened on Iran, and we got October 7th, and we got the war. And Trump would say that would have never happened under my watch. Now, there's no way of really telling if that particular funding went into, the funding of proxies that then attacked Israel on October 7th, but that certainly, that again weaves very well into the Trump narrative that had the maximum pressure, policy towards Iran been maintained, that these wars never would have broken out. So we might be seeing a return to that, but it's again unclear what part of that region they'll start with first to try to end the war.
Just very, thank you. Just stay with us a second because I want to ask you about Ukraine in a moment, but just very briefly on that, on Iran and now Donald Trump being the next US president and his role in the Middle East, particularly with Iran.
I mean, Harris and Trump both were taking a strong stance against Iran. It would be an ideal situation if somehow, despite the very close relationship that we think that Netanyahu and Trump will have, if somehow there is no escalation and there is no aggression and there is a deal that finally ends the war or at least contains the conflict, that's an ideal situation. But if things don't go that way and there is an escalation and aggression, maybe a direct attack or something like that in Iran, I think it will have, of course, very, very serious consequences in the region. And already countries like Pakistan are very nervous because we have seen in the past when US invaded Afghanistan, how that war and a 20-year-long war affected and impacted the region forever. And that kind of thing is something that makes many countries nervous. So the hope is this, that Trump would not go into that direction, but if the US goes into that direction, and if countries like Pakistan are asked that you're with us or against us, then that puts the whole entire region into jeopardy. Also, like with the wider many other consequences like Shia, Sunni, proxy wars happening. That scenario, I think, is something nobody wants, at least in that region.
OK, thank you very much, Binish. I know that time is ticking, and I do just want to quickly get on to Ukraine, because as well as spending time in Israel, you've also spent a lot of time reporting from Ukraine. Let's just play a soundbite from Donald Trump that he gave on the 27th of September, talking about Ukraine and his relationship with Putin, but also with President Zelensky, that's Ukraine's president, standing next to him. So let's just watch that, and then I'd just love to get some quick thoughts from you before you leave us.
So we have a very good relationship, and I also have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Putin. And I think if we win, I think we're going to get it resolved very quickly. I really think we're going to get it resolved.
I hope we have more good relations.
We're going to have. Oh, I see. Yeah, but you know, it takes two to tango. You know. And
Oh, awkward. A very awkward moment there, I think, and particularly with Trump saying at the end, it takes two to tango. He's saying to Zelensky, so seems to be saying it's you and Putin, two of you. You both caused this. Just to get your thoughts on that. Now we've got Trump back. Is he going to end this war? Is that going to be one of the first things that he will do when he's back in power?
I think, that little interaction between President Zelensky and now President-elect Trump says it all. I mean, he kind of interrupts him and he's like, yeah, but, sure, we want this to work for us as well. And that's kind of the fear that has been in Ukraine since, I was last there in the summer, but certainly months and months before that, as it became clear that Donald Trump was going to be the Republican nominee, what is going to happen? The fear is that he's going to try and force Ukraine into some kind of compromise with Russia that would make Ukraine look like it has been defeated. But, if you hear, I mean, there was a sort of, now I think it's a very interesting panel to watch. J.D. Vance, the vice president-elect, was at the Munich Security Conference in February of this year. And he was on stage with, I think, the now former Secretary General of the German Green Party, Ricarda Lang, and they, really represented two different views on Western support for Ukraine, right? Where he was saying, listen, this is not going to be something that the United States can support forever. Our foreign policy priorities have to, be directed elsewhere. Our efforts have to be invested in a big way elsewhere, China, South Asia, et cetera. And that Europe, there's at least going to be an expectation that Europe has to participate a lot more. And I think that will be a position for Donald Trump as well. It doesn't mean that Donald Trump will stop supporting Ukraine. I think, this is not mentioned enough, but Donald Trump in his first term actually gave unprecedented military support to Ukraine, before the full-scale invasion. So it's not that he is against supporting Ukraine, but I think we'll be seeing a gradual, push for some kind of compromise there. And the Ukrainian fear, which is a very legitimate fear, is that it would look like something, along the lines of, okay, we give up on Crimea and we give up on the eastern territories that are already under, Russian occupation, and try to sort of find some kind of compromise that will make Vladimir Putin look he has won this and that his gamble paid off after all. And that's certainly a European fear as well. I mean, that's something that we'll be hearing a lot about in Germany. Certainly. Soon.
Right.
I think probably we need to let you go because you've got other jobs to do. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it, particularly as I know you've been up all night. So thank you very much for being with us. And also I'd like to say goodbye to Binish Javid. Thank you for all your expertise, particularly on India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, and also with those Arab American voters. So thank you very much. You're going to disappear off, and in your place, we're going to welcome somebody new because this is how it works. Thank you. This is how it works on this news desk. It's all very free-flowing. And now we have, do we have to give her a round of applause? Now we have Melissa Chan. It's just like, wow, that was smooth. Magic.
Did you take a shower too?
A smooth swap. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's so fascinating.
We were just in the middle of talking about Ukraine, and what Trump might do is one of the first things, because he's talked about wanting to end that war immediately. I just was wondering, Brent, whether from what Ayer was saying and what we've heard Trump say before, with these threats, particularly with what we saw earlier this year, the big fight over giving Ukraine this financial package from the United States. It was a real battle in Congress. Where do you see it going with Ukraine? Can you speculate?
I would speculate to say that he will try to keep good on the promise of going to Kyiv and ending the war. And I can imagine that it will include territory permanently being given to Russia. And I could imagine that, again, we're talking about transactional Trump, that there will be some type of security guarantee or security deal, yet another one made with Ukraine in order to make losing territory palatable. That's I mean, of course, we could be surprised. It may not in that way, but that's what he's promised to bring it to an end. And I think this is something that we can expect him to keep his word on. I think the Middle East situation is somewhat more difficult for him to do so quickly. But I think with Ukraine, I would say watch this space and for him to do something quickly.
There are a lot of people actually commenting on the crisis in Ukraine. We have Alex who lives in Ukraine, and he says, I live in Ukraine. Hopefully he puts this to a stop. I presume he's talking about Trump here. And Ravi Roshan says that Trump understands U.S. biggest enemy is China, not Russia. So he'll try to silence the gun on Ukraine's border, even if Ukraine has to concede some territory.
Thank you. OK, so as I said, that we have Melissa Chan with us. We are talking here about Donald Trump's victory in the US election. This is an extended version of News Desk, very exciting, a very fluid version where we have people coming and going, which is very exciting. Melissa, as you know, we were talking about Ukraine. There's much to talk about with foreign policy. But first of all, now that you've joined, I'd love to just get your take on what has happened. Let's just bring it back to Donald Trump. He has won this election. He will be back in the White House. Were you expecting this, or has this come as a surprise to you? Melissa, I must just add, spent a lot of time as a correspondent over in the US as well as in many other parts of the world, but you do know a lot about politics.
Yeah, I would say that this is not, and I think Brent would also agree, this is not as much of a shock as it was when it happened in 2016.
Right. That's right.
But having said that, I am surprised at where things stand right now, which is that it looks like all 7 swing states, the battleground states, look like they're actually going to go for Trump. That's a sweep. Harris couldn't even save and retain 1. Yeah. I think that's very fascinating, and that is the shock for me in terms of the results, because when I've spoken to journalists on the ground, political journalists who've been on the campaign trail over the past few months, the thing they keep telling me is how completely blown away they are at the organization of the Democrats and their ground campaign. The fact that voters are reached out, there are door knocks, there are calls, they follow up, they offer rides to the polling stations, all of that. And then with the Trump folks, none. No calls, no ground game. And yet despite that, and usually, the ground game and the enthusiasm are massive indicators for who's actually going to win.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I know that I got, I don't know how many phone calls from Democrats, too, which I'm not a registered Democrat. I'm not a registered Republican. But they know that I live here, and they know where I'm registered to vote in the U.S., and, I mean, it was just nonstop the last 2 months, to the point where I had to text back to them, please stop.
Stop calling.
So, right. And there was nothing from the Republicans. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. There was just no...
Somehow they got a hold of your mobile number and you're just getting these texts.
Exactly.
Same thing with me. And the other thing I would add is that I did spend a lot of time as a journalist in the state of Nevada, one of the swing states. And one of the most preeminent journalists there, a guy by the name of John Ralston, he has covered every election, presidential, midterm. He knows the state inside out. It's one of those states where everybody kind of knows everybody else. It's not that densely populated. He's been north, south, in the rural areas, in the Vegas city area, and he has always predicted accurately what's going to happen. Over the past 2 weeks, he's been showing the ballot counts, not the poll numbers, but the mail-in ballots coming in from the rural districts. And it was really not looking good for Harris. I think in hindsight, when everyone starts sort of analyzing what went wrong or when did we first know, Nevada and the mail-in ballots will be a big, big moment where we knew things were not going right.
And that's interesting with the mail-in ballots, because we think of mail-in ballots being predominantly
That is the new
Democrats.
narrative, though. The new narrative and the new trend looks like the Republicans have been very strong on the mail-in ballots, not just in Nevada, but across the United States. This is unusual. Everything about this election is unusual.
So you didn't do it in 2020. It was the Democrats who did the mail-in, and also
absolutely.
early voting. And this time, Donald Trump told voters, or the Republicans, go early, and if you're not at home, do absentee.
Although I thought that he didn't like the mail-in ballots.
He
but
did
clearly...
not in the last
but he liked
election.
it this time,
But he embraced it. And
Totally. And again, going back to Nevada, Ralston has never gotten a prediction wrong on a presidential election for many, many years. He got this one wrong. He ended up saying, despite the data I'm looking at, I'm going with my gut.
Wow.
And my gut says Harris will eke out a win. It is not looking good right now in Nevada.
So that's
also, what's his name? His last name is Lichtman. We've had him on the show. He's known. I think he's predicted every president, but since before Reagan, he got this one wrong too. He uses the keys. I think there are 12 or 16 keys that a candidate has to have.
Alan Lichtman.
And Alan Lichtman. Yeah, and he.
Got it wrong.
You got it wrong.
Well,
Whereas
Iowa,
you-
of course, too. I'm sure you guys talked about
we've
that already.
talked about that. OK, let's bring in Richard Walker, who has very kindly agreed to also join us on News Desk. He's a bit of a familiar face for those of you who watch this stream regularly. DW's chief international editor. Richard, thank you very much. I know you have also been up most of the night, and you were joining us from Florida, which, of course, is a very important state today and where Donald Trump himself is. What basically is the mood like there in Florida? I assume that a lot of jubilation, or have you not been able to see it because you have been too busy working for us?
I can tell you that the distance between me getting out of bed just now and me sitting here in the hotel lobby was pretty small. Yeah, so I'm afraid I cannot report back. I cannot report back on this morning's mood in Florida with all honesty, guys. But I can certainly tell you what the mood was like down in Miami. So we're in West Palm Beach at the moment, so kind of near Trump Central, you know, where he has his famous Mar-a-Lago club just 5 or 10 minutes drive away from here. But last night we were down in Miami with the Republicans in Miami-Dade County, and that is, we were in Little Havana. So this is a part of Miami which is absolutely the sort of the home of the Cuban exile community that is there. And that's a pretty conservative community, and they were really going at it. I mean, Brent, we were on quite a few times last night as well.
I saw you partying.
It was partying. There wasn't me partying.
No, I'm sure he wouldn't. I can't imagine such a thing.
But it was deafening. I was very grateful for my noise-cancelling headphones because without those, I wouldn't have heard a thing. In fact, the funny thing was my smartwatch kept buzzing on my wrist saying that it's too loud here, you should leave the area. And I thought, but okay, if I call back to the studio and suggest that I've got to go because it's too noisy, I might, face some funny responses. But anyway, I guess, I could just like to pick up on a couple of things that you just said, because I just overheard you referring to Alan Lichtman, this political scientist who came up with this sort of method that is not sort of poll dependent, but it's based on some political the political circumstances for predicting whether someone will win an election. And it was really interesting because in the run-up to this election, he was having a pretty public fight with Nate Silver, who is one of the kind of the opposite, who's somebody who's all about the data, who's all about assessing probabilities based on averaging of polls. And the two of them really went at it, and Alan Lichtman was sticking to his keys, and Nate Silver was sticking to his numbers. But Alan Lichtman certainly, it looks like he's going to reassess or have to
I think quite a few people will have to do that, won't they, after this election result?
But I have to say that I just think that I haven't looked in closely at his keys, and I don't want to kind of say anything bad about a political scientist who's obviously, knows his stuff. But to suggest that the political circumstances were favorable to Kamala Harris, I think definitely got this election wrong. The political circumstances were extremely unfavorable to her.
Yes, tell me, what do you mean by that? For example, are you talking about the economy?
So I think basically there are kind of three issues that were central to Trump winning this. And, obviously a lot of people talk about, the more societal things behind the Trump movement and the contrast between the candidates or whatever. But I think Trump had three really very large advantages going into this on terms of issues, and that is the economy, but specifically inflation, that everything is very expensive here. Any of you guys who travel to the United States will have witnessed that yourselves. And inflation has certainly been a massive issue in Europe as well. but it feels, I think, for a lot of people here, perhaps even more intense, the impact. The fact that economic growth has improved, that there's very low unemployment, that there are a lot of economic data which are positive for the United States. The fact that prices are so different now compared to what they were 3 or 4 years ago, and also rents were another major issue. It meant that people really every single day they had those conversations where they would come back and it would be, hey, did you see how much this costs today? Or did you see how much that costs today? And that nobody's happy about that.
No.
You know, that frustrates people.
And that was a big,
every single day. And I think.
And that was an election campaign, wasn't it, from Trump, with this whole, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?
Of course. And he said, you know, the inflation was lower under me. And of course, the Democrats would say, yeah, but there were international circumstances. And yeah, but you would make matters worse. And yeah, but don't you see that the economic data are actually really good? And that only increased this sense of disconnect, because to be told by the other side, oh, the economic data look really good, made people think, what planet are you living on? You know, so but then of course you have to admit, most European countries would trade their grandmothers for the economic data that the United States has. Yeah, so you know.
Well, and what were the other two
so
issues?
I think that, so the other two would be immigration, illegal immigration, and the border. So, and you do see that during the Biden administration, there was a very, very significant spike in illegal border crossings, averaging around 2 million per year under him, where they were in the hundreds of thousands under Donald Trump. And of course, you can argue about what the drivers of that were, and that they were not all necessarily anything to do with the Biden administration. But the Democrats just had a weak political position, because they had campaigned on saying, you don't need to build a border wall. That's nonsense. Kamala Harris had even called it a medieval vanity project. And there it stood incomplete along the Mexican border. And the Democrats now conceding, oh, yeah, as part of bipartisan legislation, yes, we would actually do more to build some sections of this wall.
Well, let me stop
I think
you.
They looked like they were scrambling to try to correct a position where they were vulnerable.
Let me just stop you there, Richard, because, of course, you yourself know quite a bit about this, because you did some filming with a rancher from Arizona back in 2016, and again this year. You did a long report. We've cut it down to about a minute, and maybe we just watch that and then discuss that around the table afterwards, this whole issue of migration.
This year, Jim testified to a visiting committee from the US Congress. He submitted videos showing camouflaged people carrying backpacks through his land, telltale signs of drug packers. He says his hidden cameras show more than 3,000 crossings since 2021. And yet, as we get closer to the border, we start to see that Donald Trump's wall is there. We go back to the very same spot we came to 8 years ago. This is what it looked like then. And this is today. Trump's wall slicing its way through the hills. But construction stopped as soon as Joe Biden came into office, and so the wall ends right here.
They got to there, Biden stopped any construction on the wall. I was outraged. I thought it awful.
And I guess, Richard, that rancher is not the only person who was outraged by the fact that that wall was not finished.
Yeah, so I think it. I mean, obviously, some would be outraged, some might not care so much. But I think it created this impression that the Democrats thought, oh, this isn't necessary, and then the facts proved them wrong. At least this is the public perception. That okay, you said you don't need this wall, and yet now there are 2 million extra people crossing the border. And now you say that you want to increase border security. So I think it's basically an issue where you get a sense that in the public sphere, Donald Trump reset the terms of the debate, and the Democrats lost, and they haven't quite worked out their new position yet. And we also spoke to the head of an immigrant support group that's based in Phoenix, who is at the other end of this issue and comes from a completely different perspective from Jim Chilton, the rancher who we saw there. He's concerned about border security on his ranch. This woman, Petra Falcon, who works for Promise, Arizona, this group in Phoenix, is all about trying to make sure that immigrants who end up in places like Phoenix, whether they cross legally or illegally, but that they are then able to make a contribution to society, that they are able to engage in society in a positive way. And you could tell that even she was torn by the question. We asked her, do you kind of acknowledge now you've sort of lost the argument about border security and time is to try to move on now and talk about other issues? And she was really torn by that. Yeah. It was hard for her to accept this idea that of kind of creating a lockdown situation along the border where she knows so many people who have crossed it and then coming to the United States, made a good contribution. And that what she's fighting against is this sense of demonization of immigrants, particularly undocumented immigrants, that has been part of this shift in political and societal culture that has accompanied these last 8 years.
Richard, Melissa just wants to jump in there.
Well, I just wanted to add that in Arizona, it's super interesting because it looks like the senator, the Democratic senator, or the Democrat running to be senator is going to win, Ruben Gallego. And yet it looks like right now, as it stands, the presidential pick for the people of Arizona is going to go Republican. So this is a split sort of ticket voting that's happening in Arizona, emphasizing just how important the immigration and the border issue is. They are open. The people of Arizona are open for a Democratic presidential candidate. But the sticking point and the issue was partially the border thing, because Ruben Gallego is a moderate Democrat, but he is also quite tough when it comes to border and immigration policy.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think
Go ahead.
He's somebody who I think has been more successful than Kamala Harris in trying to navigate this shift in the political mood, and you see that. So he does talk about border security. He is somebody who has a profile that kind of fits with that. He's an ex-military guy. I mean, he does not come across as what Kamala Harris can come across as to many people, as a sort of a coastal liberal who kind of thinks, none of this really matters. He's somebody who's from the region. He's ex-military, so he was able to navigate that. Plus, he also had an opponent in Curry Lake who was seen as pretty far out on almost more MAGA than Donald Trump himself.
I think she is more MAGA than Donald Trump. I think that's quite comfortable to say.
There are some people there who overshoot, when they're trying to fit in with that political movement. And that made her personally unpopular. So that, I think, contributed also to that result.
Brent.
We saw something similar in North Carolina. You had a Democrat who was elected governor in North Carolina, and North Carolina carried Donald Trump. And so beyond just the immigration and the border issue, you have to ask yourself, so what happened last night? Has the United States, has it moved to the right, or did the Democratic Party, its progressive wing, pull the entire party too far to the left? Because you're seeing in places like Arizona and North Carolina, the voters are able to look at the ballot and pick a Republican and a Democrat, and they don't see any cognitive dissonance with that decision. So we have to ask we have to ask ourselves, then what happened? Then is America, like we talk about it all the time here in Germany, is society, is the center moving to the right, or is something else happening? And has the center stayed where the center has always been?
Very interesting point. Richard, you said there were 3 issues. You've given us 2. What's your third?
She's taking notes.
I am taking notes.
That's amazing. Well, imagine if I said, I can't remember the third one.
You could say that. You're very tired.
No, but the third one, I think, is this sort of sense of a world in chaos. Yeah. So so foreign policy essentially playing a more significant role, I think, in this election than it usually does. It's often kind of said not to really play much of a role, but it does play a role for Trump because he has been quite strongly positioned as wanting to, and I heard you guys were just talking about this just before I came on, wanting to end the war in Ukraine, saying essentially that that this is a war that does not deserve the kind of resources that the United States is putting towards it. And feeling that it's been a wasteful war and that a negotiated solution can be arrived at quickly, and even promising that he could sort of magic up a negotiated solution to that very quickly. Now, that is all obviously extremely worrying for the Europeans, but just to talk, first of all, we're talking about the US here. So how does this play in the United States? I think there is a sense, and this kind of compares to these other issues where Trump could say, look, under me, it was better. Yeah. So he can say during his time in office, there was no full scale invasion by Putin of Ukraine. Trump claims that he would never have dared do it. Obviously, we don't know that, but it's a fact that it didn't happen. Yeah, there was, of course, the low-level continued occupation of parts of eastern Ukraine and Crimea that had started years before that, but no full-scale invasion. He can say that during his period of time in office, that in the Middle East, that they made diplomatic progress there. They ushered in the so-called Abraham Accords between Israel and various of the Arab states in the region that normalized relations between those countries, that sort of set up for a more effective cooperation between those countries, and also opening up more economic ties between those countries. You can say, well, look, we made progress on that during his time. The Democrats might say, well, the fact that that Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal was one of the destabilizing factors that has led to the situation now. Of course, Trump denies that. And then also looking towards potential future conflicts, very much focusing on China. Trump saying that Xi Jinping would never dare take Taiwan if he was back in office, and suggesting that could happen if the Democrats remained in office. So in all of those cases, Trump can say, it was better under him, and also kind of key into his personal brand as like the strong man, and all I need to do is sit down with Vladimir Putin. All I need to do is sit down with leaders in these countries and we can work things out, and suggesting that Joe Biden, and perhaps even more so from his point of view, Kamala Harris, would be a kind of a pushover for them. Of course, the Democrats retort that, well, often the evidence suggests that Donald Trump is a man who people see as potentially quite easy to get into the good books of by what's the expression I'm looking for? Essentially sucking up to him, and you see some of that in some of the messages towards Donald Trump now from leaders around the world, very quickly trying to get into his good books. So suggesting this is not a man who is really strong. He's a man who is quite easy to manipulate through. Flattery was the word that I was reaching for there. But still, if you think about it, if you're a voter here thinking like, oh, the world looks a bit of a mess out there. Oh, yeah, that wasn't happening under Trump. There is another potential reason to think, he has a track record. Let's go back to him.
Yeah. OK, Richard, really interesting points there, which I'd like to pick up with Melissa in particular in a moment. But first of all, do we have anything in the chat?
Yeah, we have very specific questions coming for Richard. So I'm not going to ask all of them. But adding to your 3 reasons, someone wants to know, Ravi Roshan, he says, Richard, how do you think Elon Musk versus Taylor Swift cultural war shifted this election?
Oh, wow.
Oh, God.
Well, yeah. I'm not, I'll have to admit, I'm not a world expert on Taylor Swift. Not that I'm a world expert, but
everyone is.
Taylor Swift is not my area of specialization.
Well, it's not just Taylor Swift, right? It's Cardi B, it's Eminem, versus Elon Musk. It's not just this Elon Musk versus Taylor Swift.
Yeah. So. But Taylor Swift is obviously a cultural phenomenon, but Elon Musk is a phenomenon beyond.
I mean,
that.
We need to talk about him, really, don't we? Because
infrastructure. He has an entire social network at his disposal, and And he certainly wielded that in this, and I think that is certain to have helped. I mean, obviously, we cannot know how much it helped, but I can tell you one little anecdote from my time here on that. Before, I'd love to hear your takes on this, but yeah, so a colleague and I went to Donald Trump's second rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, which was the time when. So that's of course the place where he was shot that time during the summer. It's one of the extraordinary moments of this year. Yeah. And he returned there a few weeks later for a second rally, where they, of course, a big part of it was kind of commemorating this moment where he was shot, and also, a person at the rally was killed and others injured. But also the other big highlight of that was Elon Musk. And that he was, of all of the other people who were speaking at that, he was absolutely the biggest draw. And this was the first time that he'd been on the campaign trail with him. And so Elon Musk, he was perhaps the biggest draw for the audience there. And when he came on, and it was partway through Donald Trump's speech that Trump kind of called him on, there were huge cheers, and I would almost say there were bigger cheers for him than for Trump himself, because a lot of people there had already seen Trump. Well, it's a known quantity, but yeah.
Let's talk.
One.
Yes, go on then.
Okay.
I just want. I think that
I've got to tell you this.
You've got to tell me. Tell me.
Sorry. super mini anecdote. Okay, so there were two people standing very close to us in the audience. We were quite far back because we got there a bit late, and they were a young couple in their 20s. And I think they probably enjoyed a few beers on that day. It had been a long day. It was like a festival atmosphere. So they were there to have fun as well. But it was very much Elon Musk was the highlight. The girlfriend got on the boyfriend's shoulders. And at some point, she was kind of cheering along. And at some point, and I'm not going to attempt the accent, but at some point she said, look, I can see him right there. Elon Musk. I can see him with my own eyeballs. Yeah. And she was just absolutely astonished to be able to see this kind of superhuman guy who sends stuff into space. He has all of these businesses. And the boyfriend carrying her every now and again issued this huge bellowing genius.
Wow.
So I think that was it was just a little microcosm of the flavor of his this extraordinary kind of appeal and magnetism that he has. And if he's now going to wade into the political culture more strongly, I think this is really something to watch in recent years. And of course, he was not born in the US, so otherwise we would be talking about him as a future presidential candidate.
Richard describes it. It could be an OnlyFans.
No, OnlyFans. Maybe we could just bring up a picture of Elon Musk just while we're talking about him, because we seem to have moved quickly from foreign policy to Elon Musk.
Well, he's related. He's connected with his Starlink.
That's true.
The fact that he will not cooperate, and the Taiwanese certainly would not want to buy Starlink because they don't find him a reliable potential partner, because the Ukrainians, of course, have been using Starlink, but with limits enacted by Musk, with so much power to be able to influence the frontline activity between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And the Taiwanese are seeing that, and they've decided we're not going to go with Starlink. And in fact, over the last couple of years, have been trying to launch their own sort of lower space satellite. They have some startups. It's also funded by the government. But the Taiwanese really focused on being self-reliant when it comes to this kind of technology.
But let's just talk a little bit about Elon Musk then, because he, this billionaire who decided to throw everything at Trump, offering these crazy $1 million jackpots for people who were going to vote.
Which could potentially be illegal.
But the court
said it was okay, didn't they?
It's okay. He could keep doing that.
But where will okay, if we're just looking at Trump now and throwing it forward a bit to who his team might be, where will a figure like Elon Musk fit into a new Trump administration, do you think? Is he going to be absolutely key? Because he's offered...
The cost cutter.
The cost cutter, exactly.
They may even create a cabinet position for him to basically maybe be like a consultant to
innovation czar.
Yeah, innovation czar or something, to look at what the government is spending with the goal of cutting it who knows what, by 50%, let's say.
Yeah.
But I mean, that kind of talk scares a lot of people because there's no way you could do that without cutting some type of entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, and I think
which does not concern the richest man on earth.
It doesn't concern him, but it will concern Donald Trump because Donald Trump is very sensitive to popularity and levels of popularity, and he knows that if you take away Social Security or Medicare from Americans, and we're talking about the baby boomers too, who are receiving these, you will, stir up a hornet's nest, and you will lose your popularity overnight.
Does it matter though if he's in a second term?
I think it matters as long as he's breathing.
Yeah.
I do.
Okay, so just going back then, we were talking earlier about foreign policy. We mentioned there China, you were talking there about Taiwan and also Starlink. When it comes to Trump and his dealings with President Xi, strong man, we had this big tariff war that was going on before. Where do you see it going?
Oh, I think it's really hard to say, Brent, right? I mean, and I think we've talked about this before in the past because there is a general consensus, it appears, between both Democrats and Republicans. It's practically the only thing they can agree on is to be tough on China. But we've also had President-elect Trump say during this election campaign that he has no intention to ban TikTok, which was actually an idea that he had thrown out during his first presidency when he was breaking all these norms in terms of U.S. relations with China. And so I'm not entirely sure that in his second term he might be as tough on China. But there's definitely a group of people in his camp who are very hawkish on China to the point that they have been arguing over and over again that the United States should not be focusing on supporting Ukraine, that its resources, military particularly, should not be focused on Europe or even the Middle East, and that the resources should be in the Indo-Pacific. So there is a camp of people who believe strongly in that among the people that he will select for the cabinet and lower cabinet positions. But yet he still thinks he's friends with President Xi Jinping. He said this about not banning TikTok because he knows it is popular among young Americans. So that's the populist streak in conflict, right?
What do you think, though, about Taiwan? I mean, this strategic ambiguity policy that the U.S. has followed, Trump is not the biggest fan of that. No. Let me get your take on this. I've read that there is the possibility that he can meet with Xi Jinping and say to him, listen, we don't want to have a war. I also don't want to have expenditures at the Pentagon that would justify, fighting a war with you. So let's do this. I'm going to give you 10 years. In 10 years, you slowly make your inroads into Taiwan. Our computer chip industry, we are now fully independent. We don't need Taiwan. You can have Taiwan, but you can't use force to take over Taiwan. We will not stand in your way. I mean, that sounds like something that a transactional Trump would do.
It's not out of the realm of the possibility. The only thing that I would point out is at this moment, the very most advanced chips are still being made in Taiwan and Taiwan alone. The chip fabs, the manufacturers in the United States that have been built, frankly, as a result of Biden's CHIPS Act, are not producing the chips at the highest level.
Because there's a lack of skilled labor.
Lack of skill, but also it's just, TSMC, the Taiwanese company and chip maker that makes this, is just sitting at the very, very top. And catching up to them is just, it's an exponential race in terms of chip technology. So whether it's neither the United States nor China has access to the highest level chips in the world. They are still in Taiwan. And until that fact changes, Taiwan is still a place where you want to see stability. But yes, I do see the possibility of that kind of deal. It's not crazy. And he has said in the past, Trump, during his first presidency, I don't understand, this doesn't make sense. You look at a map, the closest part of Taiwan to China is about 1.5 miles away, and we are 2,000 miles away. And this is how he thinks. And frankly, there's a grain of truth to that, right? I mean, just in terms of protecting Taiwan, as an American citizen, you're thinking in the same way. Your average American citizen is thinking in the same way as Trump. So I think Taiwan is in big trouble right now.
Wow. Gosh, that is something that we're obviously going to have to watch over the next 4 years or so. And the other thing that obviously we know that Trump was talking a lot about in the run-up to all this is tariffs, the whole issue of tariffs. And we've got a shot from him, so a little clip of him talking about tariffs from a few weeks ago, I think. In fact, I don't exactly know when the date was, but it certainly wasn't today, where he's talking about how, the beautiful word, 24th of October, I'm just being told by Jared in my ear. Thank you, Jared. The 24th of October. So let's just listen to what he had to say, because I would love to get your take on that.
And I say the most beautiful word in the entire dictionary of words is the word tariff. I love tariff. I can make anybody do anything through the use of tariffs. I can keep people out of war. I can keep us out of war. The word tariff is the most beautiful.
The most beautiful word, I guess he was going to say. Tariff is the most beautiful word. I mean, we're sort of laughing at this, but it's very serious, isn't it, that he's talked about bringing in these tariffs for any goods from outside the US, ranging from 10%, 20%, even talk of 100% on cars. And where do they make a lot of cars? In places like Germany. So this is a big concern.
And China.
Oh, and China, of course.
Maybe Richard could tell us, the people that he's talked to in his reporting there, I mean, we know what happens with tariffs. We've seen it before. The consumer in the United States always ends up paying for the tariffs.
It's a sales tax.
It's a sales tax. And are you hearing that, Richard, when you talk to people? Are the consumers, are they aware that high tariffs, at the end of the day, mean it has to come out of their pocket?
Well, that was certainly the Democrats' argument on that, and they did actually, campaign on saying that these tariffs are a sales tax. They called it the Trump sales tax. But I think, that obviously the electorate didn't 100% buy that idea, and I think they do see an attraction in the idea of tariffs. That you should tax things that you don't want too much of. This is an idea that is actually pretty prevalent in economics, although economists are not fans of tariffs at all. But you tax something that you don't want too much of, and that is imports. This idea that the United States has a trade deficit that is too large, that has come at the cost of industrial workers in the US, particularly in manufacturing, is very strong in the US, and it's one that is partly shared by the Biden administration. They go about it in a different way. They use carrots rather than sticks, really. The Inflation Reduction Act from Joe Biden is another means of trying to, call it reshore industry, in all sorts of key sectors. But Trump saying that he's going to be using tariffs, this is, his way with words is always, part of his hallmark, and this sort of thing of like saying this is the most beautiful word in the English language has been part of that, and he's been saying that in lots of events, not just the clip that we saw that. But if you talk to economists, they say, it's just going to push up prices because, of course, those price rises will be pushed onto consumers.
And what about medication? Prescription medications, almost all of them are made outside of the United States. I mean, think about that.
India is a big
India is a huge producer. So what happens? I mean, what happens when you start having shortages of what you need for chemotherapy, which has already happened? That's something that could blow up in his face.
The thing that I'm really confused about is that most Americans don't understand what tariffs are. I wish they'd taken an Econ 101
People
course.
don't understand economics. That's unless it's their pocketbook you're talking about.
Right, but having said that, one constituent group that does understand what tariffs are farmers in the Midwest. I don't know, Richard, if you've been able to travel through the Midwest during this political campaign season, or if you have any thoughts on that, or even Brent as well. But that's something I've been really struggling in
they
terms
like
of getting
subsidies, though. They live from subsidies.
So not so much direct experience on that, but I think one thing I would throw in there is this idea. So, I mean, Trump wants to slap 60% tariffs on goods coming in from China, and he wants to open a trade war with Europe. which would at least mean this 10% minimum tax on everything, the tariff that he wants to put on everything, and probably would involve the restoration of tariffs on steel and aluminium that he brought in and that Biden put on ice. And I think one thing that a lot of people are thinking, like, how does this work? You want to open up a trade war simultaneously with both of your largest trading partners, one of which you say is your biggest strategic rival in the world, China, a country that you may even go to war with at some point. The other of which is your longest standing strategic ally, Europe, and also that is the largest trade and investment relationship between Europe and the United States in the world. Both economies extremely heavily invested in each other. So these are categorically different actors. How do you do that simultaneously, especially when you're thinking about the fact that China is desperate to try to improve relations with Europe, which have been so damaged by its support for Russia in the Ukraine war? Doesn't Trump there risk fueling a conversation in Europe saying, look, the Americans are not our friends. They're opening this trade war with us. They're forcing us into an extremely hostile relationship with China that is no good for us. We need to rethink this whole idea of kind of joining forces with the United States against China, and potentially bringing about a rebalancing of Europe's relationship with China. Yeah. So this could be a potential knock-on effect. And if you start to think these things even further along, I mean, I was in a conversation actually with a Chinese expert the other day, and also many American experts on this issue. But if you think about it, it's fairly mind-boggling, and we're all going to take time to kind of digest this. But if you have a situation like that between the United States, so the United States increasing its hostility towards China and increasing hostility towards Europe, potentially, creating at least a motivation and a potential argument for the Europeans to think, okay, let's try to patch things up with China a bit. At the same time as Donald Trump is trying to improve relations with Vladimir Putin in Russia, you have this very bizarre sort of new set of drivers in these major relationships between these major powers. So yeah, and so I think these are some of the potential things that could get whipped up if Trump really goes all in on this trade war, multi-directional trade war that he's been threatening. So I guess one of the questions is, okay, does he really go in all at once, or are we going to see a sort of a phased approach to this bit by bit? So time will tell on that. But yeah, it has huge and fascinating and uncertain implications.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. I think in the chat there are some interesting questions or comments that are being made.
There are. One thing is that people want Melissa to know that they remember you from your last episode where you were talking about electrical vehicles.
Oh, yes.
Hi, guys. Yeah, I'm back.
And there are two other issues that have been addressed, and people have asked a lot of questions, but unfortunately we haven't had the time to get to that yet. One is about Trump being a convicted felon. And people want to know, what does that mean? Will he ever be sentenced? What happens to his legal cases? Somebody called Amnesia says, funny to think a person who possesses charges for corruption and such has the vote of an entire nation. Humans are strange. The other thing people want to talk about is just the idea of America's first female president and why that hasn't happened. Some people are wondering, is this the same as Hillary Clinton's time? Why do people not vote for a female president? I don't know if it's too simplistic to sort of...
Well, she did win the popular vote. So I mean, we can't say that America is a country that doesn't want a woman as president. I mean, I think you could say Americans did, but the Electoral College made that impossible in 2016, but America's ready for that. But
let's talk then. Let's pick up on, about women, because that's something you've been looking at yourself today, haven't you?
Well, this is. I think there's going to be a lot of questions that will remain unsettled. Even, I mean, people still debate about exactly why Hillary Clinton lost the presidential election. So I think it's a very difficult conversation to have because we can never get into the brain of somebody in the ballot box when they choose a candidate. And what I'm a little concerned about is that people think that it is because Kamala Harris was a woman definitively that she lost. But as we have been discussing all these various issues, it could have been some of the issues that they felt she wasn't going to be strong enough on. I absolutely, of course, feel that gender does play a role, but it might not play as large a role as we think. Having said that, in my gut, and this is not based on anything, but I do think that when America does elect a female president, it is not going to be a Democrat. The first one will be a Republican. Sort of in that Margaret Thatcher sort of mind.
Will it be a MAGA Republican? I mean, is that where we're headed? Because we could also ask, what condition is the GOP and the Democratic Party in today?
Well, I mean, one can argue that if Nikki Haley was running against Kamala Harris, that actually the sweep from the Republicans today would even be bigger and wider.
That's a good point. That's a very good point, yeah.
And just talking then about Kamala Harris, many people were expecting women to do it for her, to get her over the line. Did that not happen?
That is something that people are trying to figure out right now, because going into the election day, the feeling was that suburban women were going to turn out and vote for Harris. In fact, they were leading compared to Trump by double digits. And now what the earliest exit polls are saying in the last 24 hours is something conflicting, which is that women did not turn out for Harris as much as they did for Biden or Hillary Clinton in 2020 or 2016. So I think we got to figure this out. What's actually going on?
Despite the issue of abortion, which seemed to be on so many women's minds when you were listening to interviews.
Yeah, and also when you looked at the midterm elections and just how many people turned out in incredibly red states to preserve the right for an abortion. But again, maybe abortion wasn't the biggest issue.
That was my sense for this entire campaign, that the Democrats were putting too much emphasis on the abortion issue and not enough on
the bread and butter.
That's what I think.
Women run households. They control the purse. Yeah. They're seeing the inflation. For better or worse, whether it's fair or not, they're mostly the ones going to the supermarket, buying the eggs, buying the milk, and at the end of the day, they're looking at protecting. And here's the thing, the campaign messaging was your daughters. You have to protect your daughters' rights. But I would posit that there is enough of a fraction of conservative, evangelical, Christian women in the United States, and not just Christian, religious women in the United States who support the patriarchy, because not only do they have daughters, they have sons.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think has not really been explored. And it's very intangible and hard to really report on.
That's right, yeah. But my sense was we heard a lot about Kamala Harris talking about the right to an abortion. And I felt there was a disconnect there between what she was saying and what the majority of the people would want her to be saying. And you have to ask yourself, did she not realize that? Did her advisors not realize that? I mean, for some reason, they thought that this was a winning tactic. This was the issue that you needed to pound on, and it didn't work.
Or maybe it worked. I'm going to play a devil's advocate a little bit. Maybe it did work. Maybe when we look back at this and really have better data than we have right this moment, women did turn out. But Trump was calling for the men to turn out. And maybe the men did turn out.
Yes.
We had people like Joe Rogan. We have people like Elon Musk. He was on all these extremely popular podcasts with the bros.
Yeah,
but everyone had said that men weren't going to vote.
Yeah,
that's what we were being told.
Maybe they finally got out of their couches and their beers, which is what people thought. Like the men wouldn't.
Let me just hold on. Let me say. Stand up here for the men. I mean, the only man at the table here. I don't think that we can say that. Just because the men voted, all these men that voted were against the right to an abortion. I mean, I know plenty of men who would say, yes, a woman should have a right. I mean, it's her body. I mean, I would think that most men in our generation would tend to think that. I mean, I may get shot for saying that, but that is how I think we've been raised, to respect a woman and to respect her right to decide about her own body.
But it does seem that more of the young men that Trump was targeting went out and voted.
And maybe it wasn't about, maybe you're both right. It wasn't about abortion, it was about also this concept of masculinity, which is related to abortion, but not entirely, right?
Yeah.
You can support abortion as a male and still feel like you're more attracted to the Elon Musk and Joe Rogans of the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me...
Ask Richard.
we've got
Richard, how do you feel as a man today?
Well, I was nowhere near either a couch or a beer in the last 24 hours.
You wish you had been.
But I think, I mean, just one thing I would add on the issue. Sorry, there's a bit of a noisy trolley going back in the background. But a bit of one issue I'd pick up on with respect to abortion. It has been interesting to watch Trump trying to soften his profile on this subject during the course of this year, to try to put some distance between him and the Supreme Court decision that was the result of the Supreme Court judges that he picked, which tossed out Roe v. Wade, of course, which led to this whole discussion. And he's been doing that in a few ways. His message has been, all I did was I returned this to the states, and it's up to the states to do things. And we've seen measures taking place in many states, and I'm in favor of this particular. Always stressing that he's in favor of not the most extreme versions. Plus, his wife Melania. Coming out with a book a few weeks ago, a memoir in which she talked about having different views from her husband on this, being pro-choice quite clearly. Donald Trump referred to this in quite a few events, including his closing speech last night, and came across slightly patronizing, actually, saying that, and my wife was she's a New York Times bestseller. Can you believe it? As if that would somehow be incredible. But I think it is quite an important part of their strategy to try to sort of show, look, Trump himself and the people closest to him have this view on it. So they're trying to soften that whole image. And I think that was designed not to necessarily win over Democrats, but it was designed to kind of give more moderate Republican women pause before they think about either not voting or voting for a Democrat on this.
I'm glad you mentioned Melania because we haven't seen much of her, and she just appeared the last couple of days. And, I keep having this song go through my head when I see her now, and it's a song by the late country singer Tammy Wynette, which is Stand By Your Man. Mm-hmm. And, talking about masculinity and the patriarchy and the role of men and women. And there's Melania, who, if you believe what the tabloids say, she and Trump are estranged, and she has very little to do with her husband. And yet there she is standing by him and defending him. And it's a question maybe I want to throw out to the women. What does Melania mean to you women?
Oh, wow, there's a question.
Well, I'll be very blunt. First ladies in general mean very little to me. It was not as if they ran for president.
Yeah.
I do think it's amazing that she is still there, and I will say no more. But obviously she is standing by her man.
She is.
She is. But I will pause it there. But listen, there was another interesting question that came out that you mentioned about Trump being a felon. And we haven't actually talked about this, have we?
Yes.
So far, so he's got had these four criminal cases against him. So far found guilty of 34 counts of felony. That was really that hush money trial that we had earlier this year, and still has these 3 criminal cases hanging over him, and that includes that federal, the January the 6th case with the Capitol riots. We've got the election case in Georgia back in 2020 when he wanted to find more votes, and we've got the classified documents case. So my main question is, number one, he is already a felon, as we've said, a convicted felon. But what is now going to happen with these other cases once he's back in the White House? Does anyone have an idea? Will he be able to just make them go away?
Kind of. Mm-hmm. For the federal ones, he will pardon himself.
That's right.
And for the state ones, he cannot pardon himself. For the state cases, but they will drag on. And while he is in his role as president, they really can't move forward.
You could also say that this could be a place that needs to be watched for an abuse of power, where you're right. I mean, he doesn't have any authority to intervene in a state case, even as president, but there could be an attempt to do just that. I mean, that would be something to watch. I mean, because we've never done this before. We've never elected a convicted criminal to president. So, yeah, this is uncharted territory.
And yet that didn't seem to make much difference to people who've just voted him in as their next president.
No.
So people just put all that aside then?
Obviously, they did. That's a tough one to wrap your head around.
If I understood the thinking of 50% of the Americans who voted for him and understood that he was also a convicted felon, I think we would have a better idea of an expectation that he was going to win. In other words, there's an electorate that's really hard to understand.
Yeah, it doesn't stick. I mean, it just does not matter to some people. And they would tell you that they think it's all politically motivated anyway, so that they don't think that a crime really was committed. But that also says that they think that the justice system is corrupt, right? I mean, and so...
And maybe he'll be after the Justice Department then, possibly.
He's promised to.
I mean, maybe I would just chip in on this as well. I don't know if you guys can hear, but...
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I talked to obviously a lot of Republicans last night in Miami, and this came up, and they just see this absolutely as having been politically motivated, and saying, you know, they tried to hit him with everything, and he kind of stands up again. So it kind of, for his strongest supporters, it feeds into the legend, you know, as somebody who can fight off all comers. And I think for people more, I mean, he's obviously done well with independents in this election. The fact that he's got over 50%, so he's expanded his vote this time. And I think for a lot of the independents, it may not be as strident as that, but it would be a suspicion that, you know, partly that, you know, some of this is politically motivated, and partly that, you know, none of these things seem quite so. I mean, everybody knew, for instance, that he was somebody who had had extramarital relationships. And if he tried to cover one up, for instance, you know, this is just what people expect from him. Everybody says he's no saint. And as for the politicization of justice, well, you know, a lot of judicial officials are elected in the US. I mean, that's a simple fact, right. You know, and other systems, you know, have a greater separation. You know, in the US, it is all a little bit intertwined, and right up to the Supreme Court now. You know, you see how the ideological balance of the Supreme Court has significantly shifted, you know, partly because of the picks that Trump made. And I think this was one of the really kind of cosmic fears about this election result, was what if it ended up like 24 years ago here in Florida, getting kicked all the way up to the Supreme Court, and you have a Supreme Court which is now heavily ideologically weighted, being the decider on this election. And I think a lot of people will be relieved that that didn't happen, but it could happen one of the next elections.
I'd just like to get a view from all of you about what you think Trump's presidency will look like. And what is the first thing do you think that he will do, Brent, when he takes over officially in January?
I think it's going to, the very first thing will have something to do with the border. I think he's going to keep his word on that at the first day in office. I don't know if it could be symbolic. Maybe he could fly down to the border and take a shovel and start, you know, where Richard showed the image of the wall that stopped. He may go there, and I could imagine him going there and taking a shovel and saying, we're going to start right back where they stopped it 4 years ago. I could imagine that. But let's keep in mind, it looks like the Republicans have taken the Senate. And the Senate approves all, like, ambassador positions, anything with foreign policy. And so we will be talking a lot about Trump's foreign policy the next 4 years, because he now has the apparatus in Washington, in Congress, to give him the green light for what he wants to do.
Melissa?
I agree with Brent. I can keep it simple and say it's the same thing. It's the border. What I will be looking at over the next few years, what I think will be consequential that everyone should be paying attention to, and what I think we'll be discussing a lot on News Desk is the foreign policy. Some people even say that we're already kind of in a World War III. What is this if not an international conflict when you have North Korean soldiers fighting for Russia against Ukraine? What is this when you have the United States involved in supporting the Israeli military in a conflict with its northern neighbors, Lebanon and Hezbollah, and also the fighting against Hamas in Gaza and also against Israel? What is this if we don't have a hot conflict yet, but look to the Indo-Pacific, not just on Taiwan, but look to what is happening between the Chinese and the Philippines in the South China Sea? It won't take that much before you have 3 global fronts. Wow. What is it if not a third world war? And we might have Trump as the leader of the United States having to navigate that. Can he navigate that? That's going to be the big question for me.
Wow, that is something to throw in at the end.
Thanks for cheering us up there.
Richard, what do you think is going to be the first thing that he will do? Do you think it's also looking at this border wall, or do you think something else?
Yeah, well, I would 100% agree with what Brent and Melissa both said. I think that's exactly the kind of sort of splashy symbolism. I mean, if Donald Trump can go and serve a burger or can drive a garbage truck, then he can go down to the wall and shovel some earth with our rancher there, Jim Chilton. Right. So we'll be watching out for that. And I agree with Melissa, that we're entering or perhaps moving deeper into, this sort of sense of a global, multi-faceted and multi-level conflict. How he pursues that will be interesting. A couple of things I would add. So military spending in the United States. Virtually every think tank event you go to here, back in Washington, D.C., people in the defense realm say the U.S. needs to be spending more on defense. It's roughly 3% of GDP right now. That is, they are saying, not nearly enough for that threat environment that Melissa just so well described. But neither Trump nor Harris ran on a platform of increasing defense spending. There is not a political majority in Congress. There is not a sort of societal majority for spending large amounts more on the military. So this raises the question, what happens? How do they deal with that? There are a few potential options. The Elon Musk program about cutting expenditure elsewhere is partly about, oh, look, my iPhone is doing funny thumb gestures. I should stop doing thumb gestures here. Is a cutting program partly about finding space to increase military spending? One analyst I spoke to said they're going to have to slash the size of the army and put all of that money into equipment, that they need a lot more equipment. What happens with nuclear weapons? So there's a growing consensus in Washington, D.C. that because you start to have to think about the Russia plus China as nuclear threats to the United States. Does the United States need to have the same number of nuclear weapons as Russia and China combined, rather than roughly comparable to just Russia? How can you find any arms control mechanism for trying to limit those numbers where you have 3 players instead of 2 players like you had in the Cold War? Does the United States need to start nuclear testing? Robert O'Brien, the former U.S. National Security Advisor under Trump, argued for a resumption of nuclear testing. Project 2025 talks about creating the circumstances for resumption of nuclear testing. If that happens, then the Russians test again, the Chinese test again, the Indians test again, the Pakistanis test again. You could have other countries coming into the nuclear club too. So an awful lot of stuff there. And final thing I would add is that, we need to watch for who is Trump going to try to recruit into his administration. And for some of the more provocative names there, that depends on can he get them through Senate confirmation. I think the one name that I would mention that would send chills down spines in Germany is Rick Grenell, who was the former U.S. ambassador to Germany. he made a name for himself with a very kind of antagonistic relationship with the German government. He's thought to have a strong interest in being Secretary of State under Donald Trump. He was the one former official of Trump who was visible in the background when Trump met Zelensky recently in New York. And if the Republicans end up with a very strong position in the Senate, 53, 54 seats, I'll admit I'm not completely up to date on the Senate picture, then, we could be reckoning with a Secretary of State, Rick Grenell, which would be a lot for Germany to handle. Putting a few things out there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. Thank you for your time. Thank you for getting up for us and coming down to sit in your hotel lobby and to really bring us up to speed with everything that's been happening over in the United States, but also with all your analysis of where you think it's all going, which doesn't sound so good to end on, but thank you very much, Richard. I appreciate it. Before we go any further, we had a poll, didn't we?
Yes, we do.
Do you want to just...
And we've received more responses than we've ever had. So we had about 7,200 people voting in the poll. The question was, will a Donald Trump presidency be good for your country? And 43% of the people say yes, 35% say no, 21% say it's too early to say.
Wow, very interesting. So,
wow, I mean, it's not an official poll. It's not a proper sample size,
but it's smart people.
Yes,
right?
it's our smart viewers on News
very
Desk.
smart.
Guys.
And also lots of comments as well that we haven't got to.
A lot of comments. We didn't get to all of them, but...
we can't go on forever as much as we'd like to. We haven't spoken about so many things. We didn't really talk about Germany or or Europe or NATO. We haven't talked about who else Trump might have on his team.
There were questions about the South China Sea as well that we didn't.
Okay,
Robert.
So lots of things we didn't get to, but we did as much as we could. And I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Brent Goff, who's been with us throughout and who did get up also early as in you went to bed very late.
I went to bed.
And then got up.
I went to bed. I saw her coming in when I was leaving to go to bed, right?
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for not falling asleep.
No, I'm
on
good.
us.
This was a great discussion.
It was a
Yeah,
good
thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. And very much thanks to Melissa Chan as well, who's been doing other things on the side. So thank you. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Next week, check out the community tab on our YouTube channel to see the topic for next week.
Yeah.
We release it 24 hours before the stream actually begins.
Yeah. Many, many thanks for being with us. It's been great, a great discussion, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.